The blood on Natalie Norton's hands wasn't her own, but the crimson stain spreading across her apron made her stomach turn as she pressed the cloth harder against the jeweler's wound, knowing that if he died, she'd lose the only person in Coloma, California, who'd ever believed she was worth more than the dirt beneath a miner's boot. It was May of 1857, and the gold rush had brought every kind of desperate soul to this mountain town, but none more desperate than Natalie herself. She'd arrived 3 years prior at age 15, orphaned when her parents succumbed to cholera on the wagon train west. Old Samuel Norton, the jeweler, had taken pity on her hollow eyes and trembling hands, giving her his name and a place to sleep in the back room of his shop. She wasn't truly his daughter, but he'd filed the paperwork claiming her as his ward, and that was close enough to family for a girl who had nothing. "Stay with me, Samuel," Natalie whispered, her dark hair falling loose from its pins as she leaned over him. The robbers had struck just after sunset. 3 masked men who'd heard about the gold nuggets Samuel was crafting into a necklace for the mine owner's wife. They'd gotten the gold, but Samuel had fought back, and one of them had stuck a knife between his ribs before fleeing into the night. "Natalie," Samuel coughed, blood flecking his gray beard. His weathered hand found hers, squeezing with surprising strength. "You're better than me now. Better hands, better eye. The shop is yours, girl. Papers are in the safe. Combination is your birthday." "Don't talk like that," she said, but tears were streaming down her cheeks. "Dr. Marsh will be here soon. You'll be fine." But Samuel Norton died before Dr. Marsh arrived, his last breath rattling in his chest as Natalie held him, and when the doctor finally pushed through the door, he simply shook his head and helped her lay the old man out properly. The funeral was attended by more people than Natalie expected. Samuel had been in Coloma since before the gold rush began in 1848, one of the few craftsmen who'd stayed when others moved on to new strikes. The mine owners came, and the shopkeepers, and even some of the working girls from the saloons, because Samuel had never treated anyone as less than human, no matter their station. Natalie stood beside the grave in her only black dress, a worn thing she'd made over from one of Samuel's old shirts, and listened to the preacher talk about a man he'd barely known. She was 18 now, alone again, and though Samuel had left her the shop, she knew the vultures would circle. A young woman running a jewelry business in a rough mining town wouldn't last long. Already she could see the calculation in some of the men's eyes, wondering how long before she'd have to sell, how desperate she might become. She proved them wrong in the weeks that followed. Natalie opened the shop every morning at 8 and closed it at 6, just as Samuel had done. She took in repair work, crafted simple rings and brooches, and slowly worked through the commissions Samuel had left unfinished. Her hands were steady at the workbench, her eye for detail sharp. Samuel had taught her well over 3 years, showing her how to set stones, how to work gold and silver, how to see the potential in rough gems that others would discard. It was during those long, lonely days that Natalie began to understand what Samuel had been trying to tell her for years. "These stones," he'd say, holding up a piece of rough quartz or an uncut garnet, "they don't look like much before you work them. But that doesn't mean they're not valuable. You just have to polish them, bring out what's already inside." She'd thought he was just talking about gems. Now, working alone in the shop that still smelled like his pipe tobacco, she realized he'd been talking about her too. But knowing her worth and convincing others were different matters entirely. 6 weeks after Samuel's death, on a scorching July afternoon, 3 men walked into the shop with the swagger of those who expected no resistance. Natalie recognized one of them as Frank Morrison, who owned the largest saloon in town and had his fingers in half the businesses on Main Street. "Miss Norton," Morrison said, removing his hat but not bothering to hide the predatory gleam in his eyes. "I was sorry to hear about Samuel. Terrible business." "Thank you," Natalie said, standing behind the counter with her hands clasped in front of her. She'd learned to read men like Samuel had taught her to read stones, seeing what was beneath the surface. These three hadn't come to offer condolences. "I'll get straight to the point," Morrison continued. "This shop is too much for a young lady to handle alone. I'm prepared to offer you a fair price for the property and all the inventory. You could take the money, head back east, find yourself a husband, live a proper life. The shop isn't for sale." Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now, Miss Norton, be reasonable. You can't possibly think you can run this business on your own. Who's going to take you seriously? Who's going to come to a girl for their jewelry needs?" "The same people who came to Samuel," Natalie said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I'm just as skilled as he was. Perhaps more so with detail work if you want the honest truth." One of Morrison's companions laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Confident little thing, isn't she?" "Pride comes before a fall, Miss Norton," Morrison said, his tone hardening. "I'm making you a generous offer. I suggest you take it while it's on the table." "And I suggest you leave my shop," Natalie replied, reaching beneath the counter where Samuel had kept a loaded pistol. She didn't draw it, but her hand rested on the grip, and Morrison's eyes tracked the movement. "You're making a mistake," Morrison said, replacing his hat. "This town can be hard on women who don't know their place." After they left, Natalie locked the door and allowed herself to shake. She knew Morrison's type. He wouldn't give up easily, and he had resources she couldn't match. But Samuel had given her this shop, this life, and she'd be damned if she'd let men like Morrison take it from her. The trouble started small. Suppliers who'd always been reliable suddenly claimed they couldn't get her the materials she needed. Customers who'd placed orders came by to cancel them, looking uncomfortable and apologetic. Someone broke the shop's front window one night, though nothing was stolen. The message was clear: sell or things would get worse. Natalie repaired the window herself, cutting and setting the glass with the same precision she used for gems. She found new suppliers, traveling to Sacramento City on the stagecoach to purchase materials directly. She worked longer hours, took smaller commissions, and slowly built a base of customers who valued her skill more than they feared Morrison's displeasure. It was exhausting, lonely work. Some days she wanted nothing more than to give up, to take whatever pittance Morrison would offer and leave Coloma behind. But every time she thought about quitting, she'd remember Samuel's words: "You're better than me now. Better hands, better eye." She couldn't let him down. 3 months after Samuel's death, in late August when the heat made the shop feel like a forge, everything changed. Natalie was working at her bench, carefully setting a small sapphire into a silver ring, when she heard shouting outside. Gunfire cracked through the afternoon air, followed by the thunder of hooves. She looked up in time to see a rider come tearing down Main Street, bent low over his horse's neck with 3 other riders in pursuit. The chase swept past her shop in a cloud of dust, but not before Natalie caught a glimpse of the fleeing rider's face. He was young, perhaps only a few years older than her, with dark hair and a bloody gash across his cheekbone. His eyes met hers for just an instant through the window, and something in that look, some desperate plea, made her act without thinking. When the pursuing riders reached her shop moments later, Natalie was standing in the doorway, her hands on her hips. "Which way did he go?" the lead rider demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "Who?" Natalie asked innocently. "Don't play games, girl. The rider that just came through here. Where'd he turn?" Natalie pointed south, toward the road that led to the mining camps. "That way, I think." I was working and just heard the noise. The riders spurred their horses on, and Natalie waited until they were out of sight before allowing herself to breathe. She had no idea why she'd lied, or even if the fleeing rider was innocent or guilty. She just knew that 3 against 1 didn't sit right, and the men chasing him had the look of hired guns rather than lawmen. She went back inside and returned to her work, trying to forget about the incident. But an hour later, just as she was closing up for the evening, a soft knock came at the back door. Natalie's heart hammered as she approached the door, the pistol once again in her hand. "Who's there?" "The rider you saved," came a male voice, rough with pain. "I'm sorry to bother you, miss, but I'm bleeding pretty bad and I don't know who else in this town I can trust." Against her better judgment, Natalie opened the door. The young man was leaning heavily against the door frame, his shirt soaked with blood on the left side. Up close, he was striking despite the dirt and blood, with sharp cheekbones and hazel eyes that held more intelligence than fear. His dark hair was sweat-soaked, and the gash on his cheek was still bleeding sluggishly. "I shouldn't have come here," he said, swaying slightly. "I'm putting you in danger. I just needed to thank you for sending them the wrong way and maybe beg some water before I move on." "You're going to pass out if you don't sit down," Natalie said, making a decision she hoped she wouldn't regret. She grabbed his arm and helped him inside, kicking the door shut behind them. "Come on, back room. I don't need you bleeding on my workbench." She got him settled on the cot where she slept, then fetched water and clean cloth. The wound in his side was a bullet graze, painful and bloody but not life-threatening if she could keep it clean. The cut on his face would probably scar. "I'm Tyler Anderson," he said as she cleaned the wounds with steady hands, "and I'm not an outlaw before you ask." "I didn't ask," Natalie pointed out, threading a needle. "But since you brought it up, why were those men chasing you?" Tyler hissed as she began stitching the gash on his cheek. "Because I'm a fool who thought he could expose Morrison's illegal claim jumping without getting killed for it." Natalie's hands paused. "Frank Morrison, you know him. He wants to buy my shop," she said, resuming her work. "He's been making things difficult since I refused." Tyler studied her face, seeing her properly for the first time. She was beautiful in an understated way, with delicate features and dark eyes that held more strength than someone so young should need. Her hands were stained with silver polish, and small scars marked her fingers, the hands of someone who worked for her living. "Then we're both on Morrison's list," Tyler said. "I'm sorry, I really shouldn't have come here." "Too late now," Natalie said, finishing the stitches and moving to the wound on his side. "Tell me what happened." As she worked, Tyler explained. He was a cowboy, originally from Texas, who'd come to California 2 years ago with a cattle drive. Instead of returning to Texas, he'd stayed, finding work on various ranches around Coloma. 6 months ago, he'd signed on as foreman for a small ranch owned by an elderly man named George Patterson. Patterson had a legitimate gold claim on his property. Nothing spectacular, but enough to provide a decent living. Morrison had wanted the land, but Patterson refused to sell. Then, 3 weeks ago, Patterson's original claim paperwork mysteriously disappeared from the land office, and new papers appeared showing Morrison as the owner. Patterson knew it was fraud, Tyler said, wincing as Natalie bandaged his side. But he's 70 years old and has no family to back him up. Morrison's men showed up yesterday and told him he had a week to clear out. I went to the land office today to try to find evidence of the forgery, and I guess Morrison got wind of it. Those men have been after me since noon. "Did you find any evidence?" Natalie asked. "Some," Tyler said, pulling a folded paper from inside his boot. "Enough to prove the dates don't match up if I can get it to a federal marshal. But Morrison owns the local sheriff, so that's not an option." Natalie finished bandaging him and sat back, studying the cowboy on her cot. He was maybe 22 or 23, with the lean, weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors. Despite his injuries, there was a quiet strength about him, and his eyes held the same kind of determination she saw in her own mirror every morning. "The nearest federal marshal is in Sacramento," she said. "That's 2 days' ride, and Morrison's men will be watching the roads." "I know," Tyler said. "I'll wait until dark, then head out cross-country. If I can make it to the mountains, I can lose them." "You can barely stand," Natalie pointed out. "You won't make it a mile in your condition. Don't have much choice." They looked at each other in the fading light, two young people caught in the same man's trap, and Natalie made another decision that defied common sense. "Stay here tonight," she said. "Rest, eat something, let those wounds start healing. There's a stage coach to Sacramento tomorrow afternoon. If we can get you on it without Morrison's men seeing, you'll be there by evening, safe and fast." Tyler asked. "I'll create a distraction," Natalie said, the plan forming as she spoke. "Morrison's men know you're hurt. They'll be watching for a wounded cowboy trying to leave town. They won't pay attention to a widow in mourning clothes taking a trunk to the stagecoach office." "A trunk," Tyler repeated, and despite everything, a smile tugged at his mouth. "You're suggesting I hide in a trunk? Unless you have a better idea." Tyler laughed, then clutched his side with a groan. "Lord, don't make me laugh, it hurts." He looked at her with new respect. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me from Adam." Natalie stood, gathering the bloody cloths. "Because Morrison is a bully who thinks he can take whatever he wants. And because if you can bring a federal marshal back here, maybe he'll finally face consequences." She paused at the door to the main shop, looking back. "And because you looked at me through that window like you were seeing another human being, not just a girl to be ignored or intimidated. That's rare enough to be worth something." That night, while Tyler slept on her cot, Natalie made preparations. She emptied her largest trunk, lined it with quilts for padding, and drilled small air holes in the back where they wouldn't be easily visible. She packed a smaller bag with spare clothes and the paper Tyler had stolen. Along with a letter, she wrote explaining everything to the federal marshal. She also packed food and water and counted her savings. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for Tyler's stagecoach fare and a few nights in a boarding house while he waited for the marshal. In the early morning hours, unable to sleep on the floor where she'd made a pallet, Natalie found herself watching Tyler rest. In sleep, the hard edges of worry and pain softened from his face, and she could see the young man he might be in different circumstances. There was something about him that called to her, a recognition of kinship. They were both fighters, both refusing to give up even when the odds were stacked against them. When dawn broke, Tyler woke to find Natalie already dressed in black, a mourning veil covering her face. "I don't actually expect you to get in the trunk until we're ready to go," she said, noting his apprehension. "But you should stay away from the windows. Morrison's men will be watching." They spent the morning in careful preparation. Natalie opened the shop as usual, not wanting to appear suspicious. A few customers came by with small jobs, and she took them with her usual professional demeanor, all while hyper-aware of Tyler hidden in the back room. Around noon, she closed for lunch as she always did, but instead of eating, she helped Tyler into the trunk. He folded himself into the cramped space with difficulty, his injuries making the movement painful. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, looking up at her. "If Morrison finds out you helped me, he'll make your life hell." "My life is already hell," Natalie said. "At least this way I'm fighting back." She closed the lid gently, then maneuvered the trunk onto a handcart Samuel had used for deliveries. It was heavy, but Natalie was stronger than she looked. 3 years of working with metals and stones had built muscle beneath her slender frame. The stagecoach office was 3 blocks away, and Natalie pushed the cart slowly, playing the part of a grieving young woman taking her time. She kept her head down, her veil hiding her expression, and tried not to react when she spotted 2 of Morrison's men lounging outside the saloon, watching the street. Neither of them paid her any attention. Women in mourning were a common sight in mining towns, where death came easy and often. At the stagecoach office, the clerk helped her load the trunk without question when she explained she was sending her late guardian's belongings to family back east. She paid for the trunk and a passenger ticket in the name of Thomas Anderson, Tyler's older brother. "Stage leaves in an hour," the clerk said. "Your brother here." "He's coming," Natalie said. "He's settling accounts at the assayer's office." Back at her shop, she quickly changed out of the mourning clothes and back into her work dress. She packed Tyler's saddle bags with the supplies she'd prepared, then returned to the stagecoach office through the back alleys. She found Tyler had already extricated himself from the trunk and was waiting in the small barn behind the office where the stagecoach horses were kept. He looked pale but determined, and when he saw her, relief crossed his face. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," he admitted. "Here," she said, handing him the bags. "Money for the boarding house, food, and a letter explaining everything to the marshal. The stagecoach leaves in 30 minutes. Tyler took the bags, then caught her hand. His grip was warm and calloused, a working man's hand, and the touch sent an unexpected flutter through Natalie's chest. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You saved my life, Natalie Norton." "Just bring that marshal back," she said. "And make Morrison pay for what he's done." "I will," Tyler promised. "And when this is over, when it's safe, I'm coming back to properly thank you. That's a promise." The stagecoach horn blew, and Tyler released her hand reluctantly. Natalie watched him climb aboard, his movements still stiff from his injuries. As the coach pulled away in a cloud of dust, she felt an unexpected ache in her chest. She'd known Tyler Anderson for less than 24 hours, but something about him had gotten under her skin. She pushed the feeling aside and returned to her shop, trying to settle back into normal routine. But that evening, Morrison himself appeared at her door. "Miss Norton," he said, his smile as false as ever. "I heard you had an exciting day, sending belongings back east." "Just some of Samuel's old things," Natalie said, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Nothing of value." Morrison stepped into the shop uninvited, looking around with the air of a man appraising his future property. "Interesting timing, given that a certain troublesome cowboy seems to have vanished from town. My men lost track of him last night." "I wouldn't know anything about that," Natalie said. "I was here working." "Of course you were," Morrison said, but his eyes were hard. "Let me give you some advice, Miss Norton. Sometimes in life, we have to choose our battles. Sometimes the smart thing is to accept defeat gracefully and move on." "Is that what George Patterson should do?" Natalie asked, unable to help herself. "Accept defeat gracefully while you steal his land." Morrison's expression darkened. "Careful, girl. You're already in a precarious position. Don't make it worse by spreading lies about your betters." "Get out of my shop," Natalie said, her hand moving toward the counter. Morrison held up his hands mockingly. "I'm going. But think about my offer, Miss Norton. Because I won't make it again, and you're going to need somewhere to go when this place isn't yours anymore." After he left, Natalie locked the door with shaking hands. She'd crossed a line, and Morrison knew it. Now it was just a question of whether Tyler could reach the marshal in time. The next few days were tense. Morrison's harassment increased. More suppliers refused to work with her. Someone left a dead rat on her doorstep. The bank, where Morrison sat on the board, suddenly questioned whether Samuel's will was properly executed, claiming there might be irregularities that would require legal review. Natalie held firm, but she could feel the walls closing in. She worked late into the nights, completing as many commissions as possible, building up whatever funds she could in case she had to hire a lawyer. She slept poorly, starting at every sound, wondering if Morrison would escalate to more direct threats. A week after Tyler left, George Patterson came to see her. The old rancher looked defeated, his shoulders bowed under the weight of injustice. "I'm leaving, Miss Norton," he said. "Heading north to stay with my daughter in Oregon. I can't fight Morrison, not at my age." "I'm so sorry," Natalie said, and she meant it. Another victory for Morrison, another person driven out. "That young foreman of mine, Tyler," Patterson said, "he was a good man, loyal. I hope he got clear of Morrison's men." "I hope so too," Natalie said carefully. Patterson studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "If you see him again, tell him I don't blame him for what happened. Tell him some fights can't be won by good intentions alone." After Patterson left, Natalie felt her determination waver. Maybe the old man was right. Maybe some fights couldn't be won. Maybe she should take what little she could get and leave before Morrison destroyed her completely. But then she'd look at the workbench where Samuel had taught her everything, at the tools he'd carefully maintained for decades, at the small sign hanging outside that read Norton Jewelry and Repair, and she'd remember that this was her home. The only one she had. 10 days after Tyler left, just as Natalie was beginning to lose hope, a commotion erupted on Main Street. She looked out to see federal marshals riding into town, 3 of them in their distinctive badges, with Tyler Anderson riding alongside them. Relief and something stronger flooded through Natalie. He'd made it. He'd kept his promise. The marshals went straight to Morrison's saloon, and within an hour, Morrison was in custody. The charges were extensive once the investigation began. The forged land claim was just the beginning. The marshals uncovered evidence of a dozen different frauds and criminal enterprises Morrison had been running. Half his business associates were arrested alongside him. Tyler came to Natalie's shop that evening, still dusty from the road but smiling for the first time since she'd met him. "We did it," he said simply. "You did it," Natalie corrected, but she couldn't help smiling back. "I just hid you in a trunk." "You did a lot more than that," Tyler said seriously. "You risked everything to help a stranger. That took more courage than anything I did." They stood looking at each other across the shop counter, and Natalie felt that flutter in her chest again, stronger now. Tyler seemed to feel it too, because he cleared his throat awkwardly. "I should let you close up," he said. "But I was wondering if maybe tomorrow you'd let me take you to dinner. As a proper thank you." "I'd like that," Natalie said, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in a long time. That dinner turned into another, and then another. In the aftermath of Morrison's arrest, Coloma settled into a kind of peace. George Patterson returned from Oregon, his land claim restored. The bank apologized to Natalie for questioning Samuel's will. Her suppliers came back, shamefaced but eager to make amends, and through it all, Tyler was there. He'd quit working for Patterson, not wanting to leave the old man in the lurch again, but he helped around town with odd jobs while he figured out his next move. Mostly, though, he spent time with Natalie. They'd talk for hours while she worked, Tyler sitting on a stool near her bench, watching her skilled hands shape metal and stone. He told her about growing up in Texas, about the cattle drives and open ranges. She told him about the wagon train west, about losing her parents, about the loneliness of the past 3 years. "Samuel saved me," she said one evening, carefully setting a tiny diamond into an engagement ring she was making. "Not just by taking me in, but by teaching me I could be more than what the world expected. He showed me my own worth. You already had worth, Tyler said. He just helped you see it. Natalie looked up at him, and something in his expression made her breath catch. There was admiration in his eyes, yes, but also something warmer, something that made her skin tingle. "What?" she asked softly. "I was just thinking how beautiful you are," Tyler said. "Especially when you're working. You get this look of complete concentration and your whole face lights up. It's like watching an artist." "I'm not an artist," Natalie protested, flushing. "I'm just a jeweler." "There's no just about it," Tyler said. He stood and moved closer until he was standing beside her bench. "What you do is create beauty. You take raw materials and transform them into something precious. That's artistry." He picked up one of the polished stones from her work tray, a piece of rose quartz she'd been shaping. "Like this. I would have walked past this on the ground and never given it a second look. But you saw something in it worth saving." "That's what Samuel always said," Natalie murmured. "That stones are like people. They don't look like much rough, but if you polish them right, bring out what's already inside, they become something beautiful." "He was talking about you," Tyler said, setting the stone down and taking her hand instead. His thumb traced the small scars on her fingers, the marks of her trade. "You're the rare gem, Natalie, and if you'll let me, I'd like to spend a whole lot of time making sure you know it." Natalie's heart was racing. She'd had men express interest before, usually crude propositions or barely disguised attempts to get at her shop through marriage. But Tyler was different. He saw her, really saw her, the way Samuel had. Not as a means to an end, but as a person of value in her own right. "I'd like that too," she whispered. Tyler smiled, that genuine smile that transformed his whole face, and leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, and Natalie felt something long dormant inside her wake up and unfurl like a flower in spring. They pulled apart slowly, and Tyler rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably tell you something," he said. "What?" "I'm falling in love with you, Natalie Norton. Have been since you opened that back door and let a bleeding stranger into your home. Just thought you should know." Natalie laughed, a sound of pure joy that surprised her. "That's convenient, because I'm falling in love with you too, Tyler Anderson." After that, they were inseparable. Tyler found work as a deputy sheriff, the position opening up when Morrison's corrupt sheriff was removed. It turned out Tyler had a natural aptitude for law enforcement, combining physical capability with the same sharp intelligence that had helped him uncover Morrison's fraud. Natalie's business flourished. Without Morrison's interference, she built a reputation as the finest jeweler in the region. People came from as far as Sacramento to commission her work, drawn by the delicate beauty of her designs and the precision of her craftsmanship. On a crisp October evening, 6 months after they'd met, Tyler came to the shop with something hidden in his pocket. Natalie knew what was coming even before he dropped to one knee beside her workbench. "Natalie Norton," he said, pulling out a small velvet box. "You are the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. You saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to live it. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The ring inside the box was stunning, but what made Natalie's eyes fill with tears was the recognition that Tyler had made it himself. She could see his work in it, amateur but heartfelt, a simple gold band with a small rose quartz stone set in the center. The same stone he'd picked up that evening in her shop, the one they'd talked about polishing. "You made this," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I had some help from the blacksmith," Tyler admitted. "And I know it's not as fine as what you could make, but I wanted it to be from me, from my hands to yours." "It's perfect," Natalie said, and she meant it. "And yes, Tyler, yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, because, of course, Tyler had paid attention to such details. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly, deep and passionate and full of promise. They were married in November, a small ceremony at the church with George Patterson standing as Tyler's best man and the preacher's wife serving as Natalie's witness. Natalie wore a simple cream-colored dress she'd sewn herself, with lace trim bought from the mercantile, and she carried a small bouquet of the last autumn wildflowers Tyler had picked for her that morning. She'd never felt more beautiful than when she saw the look on Tyler's face as she walked down the aisle, like he was seeing something precious beyond measure. After the ceremony, they held a celebration at the shop, which they decorated with ribbons and candles. Half the town came, bringing food and well-wishes. Even the saloon girls came, clucking over Natalie like proud older sisters, telling Tyler he'd better treat her right or they'd hear about it. "I know exactly how lucky I am," Tyler assured them, his arm around Natalie's waist. "I'm reminded every single day." That night, in the small house they'd rented on the edge of town, Tyler carried Natalie over the threshold and set her down gently in the front room. The house wasn't much, just 3 rooms with a kitchen pump and a wood stove, but they'd furnished it together over the past month, making it theirs. "Are you happy?" Tyler asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Natalie said honestly. "A year ago I was alone and frightened, convinced Morrison would drive me out of town. Now I have you and a home and a future that feels bright instead of uncertain." "You fought for that future," Tyler said. "Don't forget that. You could have given up, could have sold the shop and left. But you stood your ground." "We stood our ground," Natalie corrected. "Together." They made love that night for the first time, gentle and exploratory, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention they brought to their work. Tyler was patient and tender, making sure Natalie felt cherished and safe. And when they finally came together completely, Natalie felt something lock into place inside her, a sense of rightness and completion she'd been missing her whole life. Afterward, lying in Tyler's arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, Natalie thought about the journey that had brought her here. All the loss and struggle, all the fear and uncertainty. It had all led to this moment, to this man, to this love. "What are you thinking about?" Tyler asked, his hand stroking her hair. "How sometimes the hardest paths lead to the best destinations," Natalie said. "And how grateful I am that you rode down Main Street that day. Best decision I ever made, getting shot at by Morrison's men," Tyler joked, and Natalie elbowed him gently. "Don't even joke about that. You could have died." "But I didn't," Tyler said, pulling her closer. "I found you instead. Found the woman I was meant to spend my life with. That's worth a bullet graze and a few stitches." The first year of their marriage was golden. Tyler excelled as a deputy, bringing a level of integrity to the position that the town hadn't seen in years. He was fair but firm, treating everyone equally regardless of their station. The miners respected him, the merchants trusted him, and even the rougher elements thought twice before causing trouble on his watch. Natalie continued to build her jewelry business, taking on an apprentice of her own, a 14-year-old boy named Henry whose parents had died in a mine collapse. She taught him the way Samuel had taught her, with patience and encouragement, seeing in his eager eyes her own younger self. "You're good with him," Tyler observed one evening, watching Natalie guide Henry through setting his first stone. "Samuel was good with me," Natalie said simply. "I'm just passing on what I learned." But it was more than that, Tyler knew. Natalie had an instinct for teaching, for seeing potential in people others overlooked. She'd done it with him, believing in his integrity when he was just a wounded cowboy on the run. Now she was doing it with Henry, giving him a trade and a future. In the spring of 1859, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly, missed courses followed by morning queasiness that she initially attributed to something she'd eaten. But when her breasts became tender and she found herself exhausted by mid-afternoon, she knew. She told Tyler that evening after dinner, simply taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said, watching his face. Tyler's expression transformed, cycling through surprise to wonder to pure joy in the space of seconds. "A baby," he repeated, then let out a whoop that probably woke half the neighborhood. He picked Natalie up and spun her around, then immediately set her down looking concerned. "Sorry, should I not have done that? Are you all right?" Natalie laughed, the sound ringing through their small house. "I'm fine. I'm pregnant, not made of glass." "A baby," Tyler said again, dropping to his knees and pressing his ear to her stomach as if he could already hear a heartbeat. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Natalie asked, running her fingers through his dark hair. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Tyler said, looking up at her with eyes bright with unshed tears. "You've given me everything, Natalie. A home, a purpose, a love I never thought I'd find, and now this. I don't have words for what I'm feeling." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Natalie continued working at the shop, though Tyler insisted she let Henry handle more of the physical tasks as she grew larger. She found the work soothing, the familiar routine of shaping metal and setting stones a comfort as her body changed and prepared for motherhood. In December of 1859, during one of the coldest winters Coloma had seen in years, Natalie went into labor. Tyler fetched the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen who delivered half the babies in town, then proceeded to pace the front room like a caged animal while Natalie labored in the bedroom. "First-time fathers," Mrs. Chen muttered, pausing between contractions to shake her head at Tyler. "Always the most nervous." After 8 hours of hard labor, Natalie gave birth to a healthy baby boy. He came into the world screaming his displeasure at the cold air, red-faced and furious and absolutely perfect. "You have a son, Mrs. Chen said, placing the cleaned and swaddled infant in Natalie's arms. Natalie looked down at her son's tiny face and felt her heart expand in a way she hadn't known was possible. He had Tyler's dark hair and her nose, and when he opened his eyes briefly, they were a deep blue that might eventually turn hazel like his father's. Tyler was allowed in then, and he approached the bed like he was walking on holy ground. When he saw his son for the first time, his face crumpled with emotion. "He's so small," Tyler whispered, one finger gently touching the baby's cheek. "And perfect. Natalie, we made this little person." "We did," Natalie agreed, exhausted but elated. "What should we name him?" They discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Tyler said, "Samuel. After the man who saved you and by extension saved me. Samuel Anderson." Natalie's eyes filled with tears. "He would have loved that, would have loved him." Little Samuel was an easy baby. Thank God, because running the shop and caring for an infant was more challenging than Natalie had anticipated. But she managed, with Tyler helping whenever he could and Henry proving surprisingly competent at baby soothing when Samuel grew fussy during work hours. "You're a natural," Natalie told Henry one afternoon, watching him gently rock Samuel while she finished a commission. Henry blushed. "I helped with my little sisters before they died. I guess I still remember how." Natalie felt her heart squeeze. Henry never talked much about his family, and she hadn't wanted to push. "I'm sure your sisters would be proud of you," she said gently. "Look at what you've become." "I wouldn't be anything without you and Mr. Anderson," Henry said simply. "You gave me a chance when no one else would." "You earned it," Natalie said. "Just like I earned my chance from Samuel. That's what we do, Henry. We pass on what we've been given." The years flowed by, marked by the milestones of their growing family. When Samuel was 2, Natalie became pregnant again, this time with a daughter they named Rose, after the quartz stone in Natalie's engagement ring. Rose was followed 2 years later by another son, James, who arrived during a spectacular spring thunderstorm. The shop prospered beyond Natalie's wildest dreams. She moved to a larger location on Main Street, with room for multiple workbenches where she, Henry, and eventually 2 more apprentices could work. Her designs became famous throughout California, sought after by wealthy families from San Francisco to Los Angeles. But despite the success and the acclaim, Natalie never forgot where she'd come from. She took on apprentices others wouldn't consider, giving chances to orphans and outcasts, teaching them not just a trade but their own worth. She donated pieces to be raffled for the church's charity fund. She gave discounts to miners and ranchers who were struggling, remembering her own lean times. "You're too generous," Tyler would sometimes tease her, though his eyes were always warm. "You could charge twice as much and people would still pay." "I charge enough," Natalie would reply. "Money isn't everything." Tyler couldn't argue with that. His own career had taken him from deputy to sheriff after the previous sheriff retired. He ran the office with the same integrity that had initially driven him to expose Morrison's corruption, and Coloma was widely considered one of the safest towns in the gold country. They were respected pillars of the community now, the jeweler and the sheriff, known for their fairness and their kindness. But in private, they were still Tyler and Natalie, the cowboy and the apprentice who'd found each other in the midst of chaos and built something beautiful together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, in November of 1867, Tyler closed the shop early and took Natalie on a picnic to a spot overlooking Coloma, the same view that had drawn 49ers a generation before. Their children were home with Henry, who'd become like a younger brother to them both, and for once they had a few hours alone together. "You ever regret it?" Tyler asked as they sat on a blanket, watching the autumn sun paint the sky gold and crimson. "Staying here instead of going somewhere easier, somewhere you could have had a softer life." Natalie looked at her husband, at the gray starting to thread his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes from years of smiling, and shook her head. "Not for a second. This life, hard as it sometimes was, gave me everything I ever wanted. It gave me you." Tyler pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. They'd been through so much together, survived struggles that would have broken weaker people. But they'd held on to each other and built something lasting. "Samuel was right, you know," Tyler said eventually, "about you being a rare gem." "He was talking about everyone," Natalie said, "about seeing the value in people others overlook." "Maybe," Tyler agreed. "But you're still the rarest one I've ever found. And I thank God every day that you opened that back door and let a bleeding cowboy into your life." "Best decision I ever made," Natalie said, echoing words Tyler had spoken years before. They kissed as the sun set over Coloma, the town that had tested them and shaped them and ultimately given them everything. Below, in the valley, lights were beginning to glow in windows as families settled in for the evening. Somewhere down there, their own children were probably arguing about bedtime or begging Henry for stories. Their shop stood dark but ready for tomorrow's work. Their home waited for them, warm and welcoming. It was an ordinary moment in an ordinary life, but it felt extraordinary because they'd fought so hard to have it. The years continued their steady march. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man with his mother's eye for detail and his father's strong sense of justice. Rose proved to have real artistic talent, pushing the boundaries of jewelry design in ways that both thrilled and terrified her traditional mother. James was the wild one, always getting into scrapes, but with a heart as big as the California sky. Henry eventually opened his own jewelry shop in Sacramento, using the skills Natalie had taught him. He married a seamstress and had 4 daughters, and he never failed to visit Coloma twice a year, always bringing gifts for the family that had saved him. George Patterson lived to the remarkable age of 87, finally passing peacefully in his sleep, with Tyler holding one hand and Natalie holding the other. They'd become like his adopted children in his final years, and he left them his ranch, which they kept running with hired help, letting the profits support their children's education. Frank Morrison died in prison of a fever in 1862, unmourned and unremembered by the town he tried to control. The land he'd stolen was returned to its rightful owners, and his name became a cautionary tale parents told their children about greed and corruption. In 1875, when Natalie was 36 and Tyler 38, they made a decision that surprised the town. They sold the jewelry shop to Samuel, who'd been essentially running it for the past year anyway, and used the money to build a small school. "We don't need a school," the town council protested. "We have a perfectly good schoolhouse." "A schoolhouse that only teaches reading and arithmetic," Natalie countered. "This will be different. A place where children can learn trades, practical skills that will help them make their way in the world. Jewelry, blacksmithing, carpentry, sewing. The things that put food on tables and roofs over heads." The Norton School of Trades opened in the fall of 1875, with Natalie as head mistress and Tyler handling the administrative work alongside his sheriff duties. They recruited craftspeople from around the region to teach, and they made scholarships available to any child who wanted to learn, regardless of their family's ability to pay. "You're doing what Samuel did for you," Tyler observed one evening, watching Natalie work with a group of eager students. "Giving them the tools to see their own worth. Paying it forward," Natalie said simply. "The only way to honor what was given to me." The school was a tremendous success. Within 5 years, graduates were spreading across California and beyond, carrying skills and pride in craftsmanship to new communities. Natalie and Tyler were frequently asked to speak at events, to share their story of perseverance and mutual support. But they preferred the quiet work of teaching, of seeing young faces light up with understanding, of knowing they were making a real difference in individual lives. In 1880, when Natalie was 41, she received an unexpected honor. The California Jewelers Association, recognizing her contributions to the field and her innovations in design, awarded her their Lifetime Achievement Medal. She was the first woman to receive it, and one of the youngest recipients ever. Tyler accompanied her to San Francisco for the ceremony, proudly watching as his wife accepted the award with grace and humility. In her acceptance speech, Natalie talked about Samuel Norton, about the gift of being seen and valued. She talked about the importance of passing knowledge on, of lifting others up rather than hoarding expertise. "I am not special," she concluded, the medal heavy around her neck. "I simply had someone who believed in me when I had nothing." My hope is that each of you will be that person for someone else, that you'll see the potential in those society overlooks and give them the chance to become who they're meant to be. The audience, filled with the finest jewelers in the state, gave her a standing ovation. That night, in their hotel room overlooking the San Francisco Bay, Tyler made love to his wife with the same tenderness and passion he'd shown on their wedding night 23 years before. Afterward, holding her close, he said, "I am so proud of you." Not because of the medal, though that's wonderful, but because of who you are, the person you've always been, strong and kind and absolutely brilliant. I couldn't have done any of it without you, Natalie said, tracing the lines of his face with her fingers. They were both showing their age now, streaks of gray in their hair, lines on their faces, but Tyler still made her heart race when he looked at her a certain way. We did it together, Tyler said. Everything together. That's been our secret all along. As the years continued, they watched their children grow into adults and start families of their own. Samuel married a teacher and stayed in Coloma, taking over the jewelry shop and expanding it into a thriving business. Rose studied art in San Francisco and became known for her bold, innovative jewelry designs that challenged traditional aesthetics. James, after a wild youth that gave his parents more than a few gray hairs, settled down as a deputy under his father, eventually taking over as sheriff when Tyler retired in 1885. Tyler's retirement was a bigger adjustment than either of them anticipated. He was 60 by then, and though still sharp and capable, he admitted that chasing outlaws was getting harder. He devoted his energy to the school instead, teaching a law and ethics course that proved surprisingly popular. Natalie, for her part, never fully retired. She still maintained a small workshop where she took on special commissions and taught advanced techniques to promising students. Her hands weren't as steady as they once were, but her eye was still keen, and there were some skills that could only be learned from a master. They became the town's beloved elders, the couple everyone pointed to as an example of what love could build. Young people would ask them for advice, and they always said the same thing. Find someone who sees your worth. Be someone who sees others' worth. Everything else follows from that. In the spring of 1895, George Patterson's old ranch house burned down in a lightning strike. The structure was too old to save, but Tyler and Natalie, now 58 and 56 respectively, decided to build a new house on the property. Something smaller and more manageable for their retirement years, with large windows overlooking the valley and a porch where they could sit together in the evenings. They moved in that fall, leaving the house in town to James and his growing family. The ranch was peaceful, removed from the bustle of Main Street, but close enough that they could still visit the school and shop regularly. It was there, in that house overlooking the land where their love story had begun, that they spent the next decade. They had grandchildren now, a whole flock of them who would visit on weekends, filling the quiet house with noise and laughter. Tyler taught them to ride horses. Natalie taught them to see beauty in ordinary things. On a warm evening in June of 1905, as the sun set over Coloma in shades of gold and rose, Tyler and Natalie sat together on their porch. They were both in their 60s now, their bodies showing the wear of long, active lives. But they still held hands, still found comfort in each other's presence. "Do you remember the day we met?" Tyler asked, his voice a little rougher with age but still warm. "Of course," Natalie said. "You were bleeding all over my doorstep." "Romantic," Tyler said dryly, and Natalie laughed. "It was, actually," she said. "You looked at me like I mattered. Like I was someone worth trusting. I'd never had a man look at me that way before." "You saved my life that day," Tyler said. "But you did more than that. You showed me what real courage looks like, what it means to stand up for what's right even when you're scared." "We saved each other," Natalie said, squeezing his hand. "You showed me I didn't have to fight alone, that there was someone who'd stand beside me, not try to control me or diminish me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from gold to purple to deep blue. Somewhere in the valley, their children and grandchildren were living their own lives, building on the foundation Tyler and Natalie had laid. "You know what Samuel was really telling you," Tyler said eventually, when he talked about polishing stones. What? That sometimes the most valuable things are the ones people overlook. The rough stones, the ones that don't shine until someone takes the time to see what they could be. He turned to look at her, his hazel eyes still sharp and clear. But you were never a rough stone, Natalie. You were always brilliant. You just needed someone to hold you up to the light so you could see it yourself. Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. After 50 years of love and partnership, Tyler could still make her cry with his words. And you were that person, she said softly. You and Samuel both. You saw me when I couldn't see myself. And you saw me, Tyler said. A cowboy on the run with a bullet wound and no prospects. You saw past all that to who I could be. I saw who you already were, Natalie corrected. Brave and honest and kind. Those qualities were always there. They kissed as the stars began to emerge overhead, a gentle kiss of deep familiarity and abiding love. They'd kissed thousands of times over the decades, but each one still felt precious. I love you, Tyler said. Have since the day you opened that door. Will until the day I die. I love you too, Natalie said. My cowboy, my partner, my home. The years that followed were quieter, their pace slowing with age. Tyler developed a cough in the winter of 1907 that worried Natalie, but spring brought improvement. Natalie's hands grew more arthritic, making fine detail work difficult, but she adapted, focusing on teaching and design rather than execution. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in November of 1907, a grand party thrown by their children with half of Coloma in attendance. There were speeches and toasts, tears and laughter, as people shared stories of how Tyler and Natalie had impacted their lives. They taught me to work with metal, one former student said. But more than that, they taught me to work with integrity. They gave me a chance when I had nothing, another said, and showed me I could be more than my circumstances. They showed us what real love looks like, James said, raising his glass. Not the easy kind, but the kind that lasts, the kind that builds something meaningful. Tyler and Natalie stood together, his arm around her waist, and looked out at the crowd of people whose lives they'd touched. It was overwhelming and humbling and deeply satisfying. We've had a good life, Tyler said that night, as they prepared for bed in the ranch house they'd built together. We have, Natalie agreed. Better than I ever imagined possible that day in the jewelry shop when I thought I'd lost everything. You never lost everything, Tyler said, helping her with the buttons on her dress, his fingers still gentle despite the arthritis in his knuckles. You always had yourself. Your strength, your talent, your courage. I was just lucky enough to recognize it. They made love that night, slowly and tenderly, a reaffirmation of 50 years of partnership. Their bodies were old now, not the young, eager forms of their wedding night, but the connection between them was deeper, richer, forged by decades of choosing each other every single day. In the spring of 1910, Tyler's cough returned, worse this time. The doctor diagnosed pneumonia and did what he could, but Tyler was 73, and his body was worn out from a lifetime of hard work. He fought for 3 weeks, Natalie never leaving his side before admitting that it was time. I don't want to leave you, he said, his voice weak but his eyes still full of love. I know, Natalie said, holding his hand. But it's all right. We've had 52 years, Tyler. 52 beautiful years. That's more than most people get. Not enough, Tyler said. I could have 100 years with you and it wouldn't be enough. Then I'll see you again, Natalie said, tears streaming down her face. When it's my time, you'll be waiting and we'll have eternity. Tyler smiled, a shadow of his brilliant smile but still recognizable. I'll be waiting, he promised. Right at the gates, just like I waited at the stagecoach office that day you sent me to Sacramento." He died that evening with Natalie holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed. His last words were, "I love you, my rare gem." Natalie's grief was profound but not overwhelming. She'd known this day would come eventually, had understood from the moment they met that loving someone meant eventually losing them. But what they'd built together, the life and the love and the legacy, that would endure. She continued living at the ranch, though the children wanted her to move to town. She taught occasional classes at the school, served as a consultant for particularly challenging jewelry commissions, and spent long hours sitting on the porch where she and Tyler had watched so many sunsets together. On quiet evenings, she'd take out the ring Tyler had made for her all those years ago, the rough but heartfelt band with the rose quartz stone, and remember a bleeding cowboy at her back door. Remember hiding him in a trunk. Remember the way he'd looked at her like she was precious. Remember 52 years of choosing each other, of building a life, of facing every challenge together. Her grandchildren visited often, and she told them stories about their grandfather, about his courage and his integrity, about the day he'd ridden into town being chased by outlaws and changed her life forever, about how he'd taught her that love wasn't about grand gestures but about showing up every day, about seeing and being seen. In the fall of 1913, at the age of 74, Natalie Norton Anderson felt her own time approaching. She wasn't ill exactly, just tired. The doctor said her heart was wearing out, which seemed appropriate. She'd loved so much and so hard for so many years. It made sense that her heart would eventually be exhausted. She gathered her children and grandchildren around her in early November, wanting to say goodbye while she still had the strength. "Don't be sad," she told them, looking at their tear-stained faces. "I've had the most extraordinary life. I was given chances I shouldn't have had. I was loved beyond measure. I got to do work I believed in and raise children who made me proud. That's more than enough." "You saved so many people, Grandma," one of her granddaughters said. "You gave so many of us opportunities we wouldn't have had otherwise." "I just passed on what was given to me," Natalie said. "That's what Samuel taught me and what your grandfather reinforced every day. We're all just rough stones until someone sees our potential and helps us polish it. And then it's our job to do the same for others." She died peacefully in her sleep on November 15, 1913, exactly 56 years after marrying Tyler Anderson. Her children found her in the morning, lying in the bed she'd shared with her husband, a peaceful expression on her face and the rose quartz ring clutched in her hand. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from across California to pay their respects. Former students and apprentices, fellow jewelers, families who'd been helped by the school, the current generation of town leaders who'd been inspired by her example. But the moment that would be remembered, talked about for generations, was when they opened her casket for viewing. Someone had done her hair the way Tyler had always loved it, and dressed her in her best dress. And on her finger was not just the rose quartz ring, but a matching one, still bearing the warmth of having been recently removed from another hand. James had done it, taking the ring from his father's finger where it had rested for 3 years, placing it with his mother's so they could be together again. "They were never apart," he said simply. "Not really, and they won't be now." They buried Natalie Norton Anderson beside Tyler Anderson on a hill overlooking Coloma with a simple stone that read, "Natalie Norton Anderson, 1839–1913, jeweler, teacher, rare gem." And below it, carved at James's insistence, "She taught us all to see the beauty in rough stones and to recognize our own worth." The jewelry shop continued under Samuel's leadership, eventually passing to his son. The school flourished, expanding to include more trades and eventually becoming accredited by the state. The ranch stayed in the family, a place where grandchildren and great-grandchildren could learn about their remarkable ancestors. But perhaps the greatest legacy was the simplest one. Throughout California, in small shops and studios, former students of Natalie Norton Anderson taught new generations, passing on not just technical skills but a philosophy. See the potential in people others overlook. Give chances to those who need them. Recognize that value isn't always obvious, that sometimes the rarest gems are hidden in rough exteriors. And in Coloma itself, on warm evenings when the sun sets in shades of gold and rose, people still tell the story. The story of a young jeweler's apprentice who opened her door to a wounded cowboy, who risked everything to help a stranger, who built a life and a legacy on the principle that everyone deserves to see their own worth. The story of how a cowboy showed her she was the rarest gem of all, but in truth, they'd both been rare gems from the start. They just needed to find each other to see it. And in the finding, in the polishing, in the 52 years of choosing each other every single day, they'd created something that lasted far beyond their own lives. A legacy of love and integrity and seeing the value in others. That was the real treasure, more precious than any gold pulled from California's hills. The knowledge that two people could come together in impossible circumstances and build something beautiful. That love could endure through struggle and hardship. That seeing someone's worth and being seen in return could transform everything. The shop windows on Main Street still gleam with carefully crafted jewelry. The school still teaches eager students trades that will sustain them. And on the hill overlooking Coloma, where two headstones stand side by side, wildflowers bloom every spring, rose-colored and beautiful, as if the earth itself remembers the love story that unfolded there. A jeweler's apprentice and a cowboy. A rough stone and someone who could see its potential. A love that polished them both until they shone and in shining lit the way for countless others. That was their story. That was their gift. And it would echo through the generations. A reminder that the rarest gems are often found in the most unexpected places, waiting for someone with the wisdom to recognize them and the courage to help them become what they were always meant to be.